Hello, everyone. Today I want to talk about the Constitutional Convention, and for the most part, I want to go over the idea of how difficult it was to create the United States. Right? Um, One of the main, I guess, myths that you see a lot around the US is when people say the phrase, the founding fathers wanted this or the founding fathers wanted that. Right? So to me, that's kind of like an incorrect understanding of American history because for the most part, the founding fathers disagreed on mostly every single issue, right? And it's very understandable, right? Because they come from different places, they have different goals, they just have different motivations in general, right? None of this is better illustrated than what we see at the Constitutional Convention, which is the place where the Constitution was uh, created, right? So I want to go over the difficult the difficulties it entailed to create the Constitution and all the different arguments and compromises that went into creating the U.S. Constitution, right? Let me start off by showing you this, right? So this is a very famous painting of the Constitutional Convention, and you see some of the most prominent people in this painting. You see George Washington over here. You see Benjamin Franklin. You can see over there John Adams. It's Madison over here. You see Monroe. You see Hamilton. Some of the most prominent people, the people that we call the founding fathers, right? So this is also the image you see in the back of the $2 bill. The interesting part about this painting is that this image never happened, right? And I don't mean to say that just because none of them were there at the same time together, but also the idea that they would sit down and be kind of like very friendly towards each other. It's also something that it's not representative of what happened at the Constitutional Convention. And it makes sense if you think about it, right? Because most of those people are very different from each other. They're from very different backgrounds, right? The great unifier in there is George Washington, also Ben Franklin, but for the most part, Washington is the great unifier in all of this. You need to think about it like this, all right? People have different ideas on what the direction the new country should take, right? Because they're very aware that they are forming a new nation. So they wanted to go, to be honest, in a lot of ways, to their best interest. Not necessarily what is the best for the country itself, but what is for the best of their interest, right? So Northerners have a certain motivation, certain goal. Like for example, Northerners do not care about slavery. Northerners think more about industry. They think more about commerce, merchants making business with Britain. They're not too eager on a westward expansion, whereas Southerners care more about slavery. They care more about an agrarian society. They care more about a westward expansion. So there's a lot of differences between them guys, right? And it is impossible to think that they're gonna agree on all those things, right? Because you also have big states, you have small states, you have the issue of slavery. There's a lot of different ideas on how America should look like, all right? So, for example, Hamilton wanted America to look like a monarchy, not exactly a monarchy, but he was talking about hereditary titles, kind of like an aristocrat society. Other people wanted to get away from that as much as possible and form kind of like Madison, that he wanted more of a republic the way it was formed. So everyone wanted different things. Everyone wanted to roll in different directions. So it is almost a miracle that they, through compromises and through Washington and Franklin, they got to unite and form a new country, right? In this constitutional convention, you see a lot of examples of this, right? The different compromises on big states and small states between how should slavery be accounted for, right? For purposes of representation, on um, many other things that I'm gonna go over, right? But the idea that the U.S. is founded and the founding fathers had a specific vision for what America should look like, it's kind of like very incorrect, right? They do agree that there should be some idea of a democracy, not a direct democracy though, right? So they want not exactly a monarchy, they want to get away from what Britain used to be, but they don't have a specific on what America should look like, right? So we're gonna see a lot of different visions on how America would look like. So, all right, so this is the video I was talking to about. It's called Compromise and the Constitution of the U.S. It's from a documentary that PBS did recently, PBS with Ken Burns, and it's called Benjamin Franklin. Ken Burns does amazing documentaries, by the way, guys. If you want to see documentaries on the U.S., follow anything done by Ken Burns, right? So let me show you this on the Compromise and the Constitution of the U.S., and I'll just break down some of the important issues that happen here.
One of the thorniest issues was how Congress would be apportioned. Under the Articles of Confederation, each state had an equal vote, and delegates from smaller states demanded that it stay that way. Larger states, which would be contributing more in taxes, wanted Congress to be based on population.
So this is the New Jersey plan and this is the Virginia plan, right? So the idea is that smaller states, such as New Jersey, want to have equal representation in Congress, whereas larger states, such as Virginia, want to have representation based on population. Okay, so what does this mean, right? This is some of the questions sometimes students ask me, like, why does it matter, right? Why is such a big deal? Representation in Congress is going to be important, guys. First of all, that is the whole idea of the U.S. Revolution, right? Taxation without representation, right? So why representation is so important, right? Representation is important at the time, guys, because you need to think about it this way, right? The more representation you get in Congress, the more that you can mold the laws to what you want them to be. Remember how earlier I was telling you that everyone wants different things, and quite honestly, everyone wants what's best for themselves. The more representation you get in Congress, the more you can influence those laws to work to your benefit. All right, so this is another example, the way I see it, that not everyone wants what's best for the nation, right? Everyone wants what's best for themselves, right? So it's not like smaller states don't know it's a bit unfair that they're all considered equal, right? Because some of the larger states that contribute more through taxes and representation and all different things, it's a little bit unfair, right? That smaller states and bigger states should be considered equal, right? But they know that, but they can't give that too much advantage, right? Because then they're gonna be basically following the lead of other states that don't look out for the best of their interest. And the other way around is the same, right? Larger states know that it's a little bit unfair that they're gonna be the ones holding all the power in Congress if they get their way, right? Because then states like Rhode Island, states like New Jersey, states like some Connecticut, the smaller states, they're not going to be able to make a lot of decisions in Congress. So they know this, but at the same time, they need to look out for the best of their interests, right? So this is the reason why representation in Congress becomes so significant, even today.
Was placed on a committee to find a workable compromise.
And finally, Franklin gets up and he says, when we were young tradesmen here in Philadelphia, we'd take a little from one side and shave from the other until we had a joint that would hold together for centuries. And his point was that compromises may not make great heroes, but they do make great democracies.
As the impasse over apportionment threatened to derail the convention, Franklin began inviting important delegates to his home, where they could socialize in the late afternoon under the branches of his mulberry tree and try to find common ground.
They discussed science, They discuss the things they're talking about that they have to compromise on, and he helps cool the passions of that hot summer under the shade of his mulberry tree.
So this is where you see a lot of the significance of Ben Franklin, because although most of the people are unified through Washington because that's the most respectable person out there, Franklin does a lot of the legwork on getting people to join, to kind of like compromise on different issues, right? So compromises are not necessarily going to be what's the best for the future of the nation, because no one is getting exactly what they want, and it's kind of postponing the issue at hand, right? So, but it will be what is necessary at the time to get a working nation and move forward, right? So compromises may not be the best thing for the future, but for the time being, that is what the nation needed to move forward unified.
In the end, a compromise was reached. Each state would have the same number of senators, 2, chosen by their legislatures. The members of the House of Representatives would be elected by voters, white men only, and each state's share would be based on its population. To mollify the southern states, their populations would include their number of enslaved people. But each of those human beings would be counted as only 3/5 of a person.
Okay, there's a couple things. One of them I just wanted to mention that the today that is called the Great Compromise. That is the way Congress works. In Senate, at first, the senators were chosen by the legislature, but that was changed through the, if I'm not mistaken, it's the 17th Amendment, that basically now we vote for the representatives, right? The other thing I wanted to mention was that this idea of the three-fifths compromise that they're talking about right now, a lot of people confuse it in the sense of they think the three-fifths compromise means to say that slaves are 3/5 of a human, and that's why they're being counted as 3/5, right? This is not what the three-fifths compromise is saying. Actually, if you look at the phraseology, it specifically calls them persons, right? It doesn't say slaves. It says people who are not free, right? Or 3/5 of all other persons who are not free. Something around there is the phraseology. It doesn't say because they're less of a human, they're going to be counted as 3/5. This is for purposes of representation, guys, right? For taxation also. Okay, so what the three-fifths compromise is trying to do is basically what they're realizing is that if slaves are not counted for the purposes of representation, then the northern states are going to have a huge advantage over the South in Congress. And we've already talked about the significance of House representation. So the compromise is that the South cannot let the North have too much representation over the South, right? So the way to counterbalance that is to give the slaves some type of representation in order for them to be equal, right? In order for them to have equal representation in Congress. The southern states actually wanted to give all slaves full representation, right? So this is something that students sometimes tell me. The three-fifths compromise is very racist. They should have given slaves full representation. And the argument is that would have been bad, right? If you give slaves full representation in the three-fifths compromise, you're going to give the southern states way too much power. They're going to be able to pass laws in benefit for the slaves. Because remember, they're counting slaves for purposes of representation, but the slaves don't vote, right? The southern states are going to basically get this power to pass legislation that expands slavery, right? So the solution, I know it sounds counterintuitive, is to give slaves zero representation. That way, the northern states get more representation in Congress, and they're able to pass anti-slavery laws, right? Or to abolish the either the institution of slavery or the expansion of slavery, right? So this is one of the ones that gets confused by a lot of the students, that they think the Three-Fifths Compromise means to say one thing, but it's not that thing, right? It doesn't mean to say they're three-fifths of a human. It's for purposes of representation. The compromise is, how do we move forward, right? The southern states is not gonna accept uniting under these circumstances, because they know the northern states are gonna end up abolishing slavery. So the compromise is three-fifths. Okay? And that number specifically, three-fifths, the reason is that is approximately how much they need to account the slave for in order for them to be balanced. Okay.
Talk about slavery directly, and the word slavery is never mentioned in the document itself. The difficult fact to accept is that the Union is only possible if it includes the South. And the states south of the Chesapeake are committed to slavery, especially Virginia and South Carolina. If you did the moral thing in the summer of 1787 and took a clear stand and insisted on it, the Constitution would have never passed.
So it is very unfortunate, right? In order for the U.S. to become the U.S., it needs to be North and South. Otherwise, you're going to have two different nations, one in the North, one in the South, forever competing against each other, right? And they would have been competed on mostly everything, right? Because there would have been a race to expand west, a race to, slavery versus free, which it kind of did within the U.S., but it was in a way more controlled. The South cannot do a lot of things without the North. The North cannot do a lot of things without the South. So united would have been the better solution, right? I know what they mentioned in there. It's very true. If you would have done the moral thing at the time and basically not allow slavery and stand your ground, the U.S. does not exist. So this shows you a lot of the priorities, even for super abolitionists like Ben Franklin or John Adams, that they agreed to the compromise and they agreed to everything on the Constitutional Convention, because to them, even though they despise slavery, the number one priority for them was not abolishing slavery, right? Their number one priority was creating a functioning nation, right? The way slavery is thought as in 1787 is more of a necessary evil kind of angle. And a lot of them, including Washington, including Jefferson, including John Adams, including Ben Franklin, they believe slavery is going to fade away. They don't think it's going to get much worse. They just think it's something that is going to fade away on its own, and it's kind of like not worth, separating two different nations.
A tragic compromise, obviously, for many populations in the United States who had no party to this agreement. They had never agreed that they would be represented in this way. And so the compromise looks especially compromised in those terms.
This is America's original sin, and they know it. Nobody in the convention or at that moment talks about slavery as anything other than a necessary evil.
The original sin of slavery was more than just simply compromising. The original sin of slavery began, at least for these colonists, years before. For Franklin, unity and compromise was the only thing that could make this new nation move forward. Without it, it would be a failed journey. American democracy would not develop without it. And for that reason, Franklin, as well as others, sidestepped the issue of slavery.
Yeah, this is kind of like what I just mentioned earlier. They kind of see it as we've come so far to basically not make the nation work, right? And slavery is the issue of the thorn on the side of everyone, right? They've already overcame the idea of large states versus small states, representation. They've already overcame the whole how much power should each state have? A lot of these different issues, guys. How much should the national government have versus how much the state should have? These are very, very, very difficult issues that they've overcame, through a lot of work from people from both sides. Your Hamiltons, your Madisons, your Jays, your all the different people, right? And at the end is just the issue of slavery, right? So they kind of see it as, unfortunately for them, the priority will be keeping a functioning nation, a republic that is this brand new thing that has never been done before, is going to be for them more important than trying to abolish slavery right then and there.
17th, 1787. The delegates gathered to vote on the proposed Constitution. Benjamin Franklin made the motion for its adoption.
I agree to this Constitution with all its faults, if they are such, because I think a general government necessary for us. I doubt, too, whether any other convention we can obtain may be able to make a better Constitution. For when you assemble a number of men to have the advantage of their joint wisdom, you inevitably assemble with those men all their prejudices, their passions, their errors of opinion, their local interests, and their selfish views. From such an assembly, can a perfect production be expected? It therefore astonishes me, sir, to find this system approaching so near to perfection as it does. And I think it will astonish our enemies, who are waiting with confidence to hear that our counsels are confounded, like those of the builders of Babel, and that our states are on the point of separation, only to meet hereafter for the purpose of cutting one another's throats. Thus, I consent, sir, to this Constitution, because I expect no better, and because I am not sure that it is not the best.
So what Franklin is basically saying here is that they created something so big, so significant, something that is not a Greek democracy, it's not a Roman republic, it's a combination of a lot of things, something that has never been done before. He thinks it's as close as perfect that it can be, with just the issue of slavery, right? So he believes that the best way to move forward is to just adopt this constitution and kind of like try and work your issues as time goes by, right? So this is basically the argument behind adopting the Constitution as it was, and is that if you think about it, you have your Madisons, your Hamiltons, your Franklins, your Washington. This is an ensemble of people that are truly brilliant, all right? Some of them I kind of consider to be as close to a genius as you can be, and to have this all people together to create the nation that we created, it is truly astonishing, right? So Franklin realizes this too, and he kind of sees it as this is the best that we all together could create, and this is the way to move forward.
Franklin's motion was approved. One by one, the delegates signed the new Constitution so it could be sent to the states for ratification.
He signed it, and I think he was relieved that it brought Americans together. And that was something that he had wanted ever since the Albany Conference. He had wanted Americans to be a part of one grand whole. This might not be the best, but it was the best that you could get, and he recognized that.
The Constitution is the framework for an ongoing argument about who we are as a people and where power resides. And it's presumed that each generation will be engaged in an argument and take it in new directions. What do we mean by we the people? And certainly we mean a lot more people now than we did then.
Yeah, this is what people mean when they say the Constitution is a living document. This exactly it. You can amend it and change it with time, and different generations see different interpretations of what is written down, right? So this is another reason why the Constitution is brilliant, and Franklin realizes this.
Work done. The doors to Independence Hall were thrown open. Franklin was approached by one of the city's most prominent citizens, Elizabeth Willing Powell, whose own rights had not been considered. She asked him, "Well, doctor, what have we got? A republic or a monarchy?" "A republic," he answered, "if you can keep it."
Hi, this is Ken Burns. I hope you enjoyed that excerpt from the film David Schmidt and I made exploring the extraordinary life of Benjamin Franklin. Here are some more clips you might like, and you can watch the entire Benjamin Franklin series on the PBS video app or at pbs.org.
Yeah, if you have time,
funniest...
if you have time, you need to watch this entire document on Franklin. I mean, the man is brilliant, is someone that I deeply admire, and here they give you a big insight on what took for the Constitution to be ratified, right? I'll explore a little bit more in other videos about the whole, Federalist and Anti-Federalist and the Federalist Papers, Madison, Hamilton, and all different things. Here they're concentrating largely on Franklin, but those work from the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and all the work it took to ratify the Constitution, it's just another layer on how difficult it was to ratify the Constitution, on two, the different visions for America, and three, on the brilliance of how the Constitution works, right? And you see it a lot in the Federalist Papers. It's amazing because you can see an insight into the mind of the founding fathers and how the Constitution should look like, right? But we'll talk about that at a different time. So again, if you have a time, watch this, and I'll see you guys soon, okay? See y'all.